Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a lovely lunch. Yes, I'm Emma. I'm founder of the Pineapple Lounge. I guess we're sort of similar-ish to the Food People in that we are obsessed and very passionate about one particular part of culture. What we study is children and childhood and parenting and youth and teens as well. So we spend all of our time going out speaking to hundreds and hundreds of children and families all over the world on behalf of our clients. We work in the toy, entertainment, food, drink, music, all sorts of different categories. And I'm really here today to give you a bit of a thought piece on some of the opportunities that we feel are bubbling up with emerging generations and today's kind of modern families in where food brands can innovate in that space to meet the needs of some of the shifts that we're seeing in kind of parenting and education. This is actually my own child. This is Phoenix, he's 9. And I'm going to be speaking today a little bit about the importance of trial in the role of encouraging children to expand their eating behaviours, which is an ambition of many parents, including my own. So the presentation today certainly has references and sort of significances for a lot of different markets, but for the purposes of today, this is a much more Western point of view. Obviously, food is so culturally influenced. I don't quite have enough charts and time to talk about the whole world, but I'm certainly around all afternoon if you want to talk about how this applies to other markets. But the main things you need to know about generations shaping your industry, there are these 3 groups that we are studying continually at the Pineapple Lounge, and they're the ones that you need to know about. So at the very youngest end of the spectrum, we have Gen Alpha. This may be the one that you are least familiar with, but this is essentially today's children born from 2010, sort of 9 and under, and these are the planet's first true digital natives. We've heard millennials being called digital natives. We've heard Gen Z being called digital natives. None of that is actually true. Gen Alpha are the first to have a fully digital childhood. So 2010, that was the year I founded the business, and we also called it the end of analog childhood. So these children have been born into a world of all of the technologies that we take for granted and the levels of sophistication that they are at today. They are also training for the unknown. So parents having children today, which I'll come on and talk about, don't really know what the world is going to be like when these kids become adults. We don't know what jobs will be available. We don't know what state the planet will be in. And that's really significant in how they're being parented. Does anyone recognize this little Gen Alpha kids? Any parents been subjected to watching his content? One sad, lonely, tired mum over there. This is Ryan of Ryan's Toys. I think he cashed in about 26 million from YouTube last year from his channel about unboxing toys, playing with toys, and completely disrupted an entire industry. So the whole toy category now thinks differently about how they advertise, about how they become ethical about what's advertising and not, and about how they innovate as well and create product experiences. So he's a good example of how this generation is going to bring disruption, and they're going to bring it early. It's already happening. Next up from them, their older siblings or their older peers that they're looking up to, we have Gen Z. So these are today's tweens up to young adults. So they're up to in their early 20s. So some of them are now out in the workplace. You may have them lurking in your businesses already. And this is very exciting because boomers are working for longer. So it's one of the first times we're going to have 4 generations, Z, millennials, X, and boomers, working side by side. And that has already started happening. It's going to be completely harmonious, of course. And you probably know most about Gen Z, about their activism and their role, particularly in teen activism. Now, I don't want to overclaim that they are all completely out there kind of taking part in this type of activity to change the world, but certainly there is a lot of them that care about the future of the planet, and their generation really has a sense of the world's problems on their shoulders, and they share a deep sense of injustice, whatever cause that they care particularly about, whether that's inequality or racism or environmental issues. They have this sense of injustice and a real lack of empathy with adults who have made decisions that has led to the planet that we all live on today. They're also what I would call social media guinea pigs. So they are the first generation to come of age with social media. And the offset of that is that some of them have taken advantage of some amazing opportunities, but many of them suffer with mental health problems and issues such as anxiety, which causes them issues with entering into adulthood. They are incredibly opinion expressive. I think that's something that all teenagers have been, but they are very used to having different channels and means of expressing that opinion. And then the other group to think about that's bringing disruption are millennial parents. So if in your organisation you're still talking about millennials as today's youth, sadly, for any millennials in the room, you are no longer in that demographic. Millennials are increasingly becoming the majority group of parents today. Millennials are much more likely to be parents of Gen Alpha. They're in their mid to late 30s. And we all know that millennials, an entrepreneurial generation, kind of disrupted everything. They caused lots of problems for lots of brands and marketeers. And now they're doing the same with parenting. So after a tough time adulting, millennials are really embracing parenting like a career. They are obsessed with shaping these little Gen Alphas and training them for the unknown. And they're going about this in a very millennial, disruptive and entrepreneurial way. And this is having a big effect on how these younger kids are shaping up. So 3 generations to think about. Now, there's lots of things that I could tell you about young people in terms of what makes and shapes them, but we've chosen these 3 to focus on because we think they're most significant in terms of what we're seeing as the opportunity within food. And this is really all about how exposure and openness to diverse experiences is becoming a really critical component of modern childhood. So let's take, first of all, growing up diverse. So whether this is side by side in terms of the peers that they go to school with, or whether it's more digitally in terms of the friends that they make online or the content that they're viewing, these kids are kind of eroding boundaries, both in terms of gender, of religion, of race. There is a continual fluidity between boxes that previously people and kids were put in. And I'll give you an example of a recent product that has launched.
School children across the country are...
No.
School children across the country are...
Okay, it's not going to play in the right order, so I'll come on to the next one and then hopefully that video will play at the end. But this is a video that's about a product that's just launched called Creatable World. It's the first gender-neutral doll. It was launched by Mattel recently. This is huge news. It's quite unusual for large toy brands to take big risks with gender in their toys. And this really allows them to blur the boundaries and kind of play with the dolls in whatever style they want to. The second point to make is that, as I said, they're very opinion expressive. And what's really interesting in the age of Greta and how she has become a role model for many is that we have seen this dynamic flipped between adult and children. So here we have children, young people leading a global movement. These are kids that want action. These are kids that seem to have received a memo that adults don't always make the right choices for them and have not done historically, and they want to see action and something different, and they're taking that into their own hands. So she is the catalyst, she's the inspiration, she's also 10 years old. And the third insight to think about is this, what we call the rise of of resilience. So helicopter parenting has kind of dominated parenting styles in many markets for some time now. We're at the very beginnings of seeing the ushering out of that. And what we're seeing coming in is a more focus on practical skills and grit, which we've seen lacking in some of the former youth generations, and parents making much more effort to bring those in. Have a look at this example from North Wales. This, believe it or not, is a playground. And this is one of many examples of playgrounds which encourage and facilitate risk-taking that children aren't getting as naturally anymore in their day-to-day lives. So risk and taking risk and pushing boundaries is something that many children have had removed from their childhood as life has become much more structured, much more academic, and examples like this show how we're at the very start of putting that back into childhood.
Introducing Creatable World, the first ever doll line designed to keep labels out and invite everyone in. Creatable World, all welcome.
So growing up diverse, having big voices and wanting action, and increasing resilience, these are all really important emerging trends that we're seeing come into the way that millennials want to raise their children. And part of the reason why, as I said at the beginning, these are emerging is this idea of preparing kids for this unknown future. So we don't know what the world is going to be like when these children become adults. Therefore, what happens in that instance is that parents either become fearful or they become opportunistic. And what we see that unites them is this idea of like covering all bases mentality. So whether that's the parents who introduce lots of extracurricular into their children's lives or go down the kind of emotional skills and intelligence route, there are lots of things happening that help parents to kind of give them this feeling that I don't know what jobs are going to be available, I don't know what the planet's going to be like, but I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. I'm trying to just cover all bases. And we see this across a range of categories, across food, which I'll talk about, but also in their music tastes, in their travel, where they're taking them, even in personal style and fashion, in their relationships to gender, how they're forming friendships, in their emotional skills, what they're thinking and how they're encouraging them to play, and also in their technical skills and abilities, covering all bases. And what we observe is that this idea of an expanded, a really explored full identity and having diverse interests and cultural awareness has now, or at least is starting to become what good parenting and future-proofing a child looks like. So identity creation is obviously, a historical part of coming of age and part of being a young person. Historically, it has happened more intensely in adolescence, and we're seeing that come in much more in the Generation Alpha stage, even children at sort of 4 or 5, very young children being encouraged to sort of identify their strengths, being encouraged to have unique passions that they want to pursue. And this idea of having a very fleshed out full identity is really aspirational for lots of parents. We use Jason Momoa here, who is also known as, he's in the film Aquaman, he's also in Game of Thrones. He's kind of emerging as an alternate new millennial parent role model, and he talks a lot about kind of the surrounding of what he's putting around his children. Again, focusing on things like passion and culture and diverse interests as a way to future-proof them for when they go on to become adults. So how does all of this relate to food and to your industry? When we were preparing for this presentation, we started to think about the different ages and life stages which change significantly as a child grows up. And when we looked at the very far end into the baby and the toddler space, we can see a lot of innovation here. And same with the top end towards the teens and the young adults. There's still some things that haven't quite changed there, but there is definitely a lot of sophistication and progression. Where we saw the most kind of stagnation, if you like, where we felt that things could be different or could be more innovative, but haven't changed as perhaps as much as the other two categories, was in the middle, in middle childhood. So 6 to 12 years old is known as middle childhood, and it feels a little bit stuck. And that's what we want to talk about with you guys today and share some opportunities for how to innovate within that space. So if we look at what has changed at the bottom end of the age groups in baby and toddler, those days of kind of spoon feeding a baby mush from a jar are dwindling. Baby-led weaning is the current kind of approach that is favoured and kind of championed in terms of how to introduce babies to food. And this is about giving really young children autonomy right from the start and giving them really sort of sensory and tactile ways to experience food for the first time. So it's less about getting the spoon in them and more about letting the baby have autonomy over their own eating behaviours. If anyone has ever done it, it is incredibly messy, but it is the sort of preferred, certainly here in the UK and across some markets in Europe, is the current preferred way to introduce young children to food. Similarly, monkey platters are a trend that have been going for some time in the slightly older toddler age, but again, allowing the child autonomy to pick how they want to eat their different meals. And we also see a real shift in flavour combinations. So going shopping in the baby aisle and looking at some of those combinations now is quite staggering compared to what it used to be like. And at the top end of the scale with our older Gen Z, we also see a big shift here in terms of food going from being what was quite functional and kind of gut feel and giving energy to actually something that is more feeding their cultural curiosity, connecting them socially, and also giving them escapism as well. The relationship between who I am and what I want to communicate about myself to the world and what I eat has become much closer. And we are seeing those trends, certainly not for all teenagers and young people, but there is much more sophisticated and maturing attitudes to things like being flexitarian, environmentally conscious, and experimenting with more global tastes. Interesting stat here that 20% of UK Gen Z believe that the world will be completely meat-free by 2030. But what about in the middle? So that middle section, that middle childhood. And here we really see the sort of shift in how the category has moved on, swinging between kind of what we call rut and radical. So for sure, there has been some great innovation. We see a trend, particularly a love for Japanese culture, helped along by the kind of kawaii trend, and restaurants that are quite theatrical and playful, like Wagamama and Yo Sushi, being quite popular with lots of children. Even McDonald's has had great success with its healthy swaps, and this idea of swapping in, swapping out is something that's become quite commonplace in schools and home. And even the subscription family meal kit delivery boxes have started to get in on the family action, this idea of kind of creating the meal together at home. But when we speak to parents, we constantly have most of our conversations around this space here. It feels like the same old problems haven't really gone away. Plain tastes, yellow foods, time, convenience, food waste, kids not eating stuff, and sugar. Sugar is still an increasing issue. I've got a quote here from Joe Wicks, who is emerging as the new face of children's health and food. He says, "My experience with kids who are fussy eaters is that their parents give them something once, the child doesn't like it, so they give up. The earlier you start on kids' different foods, the better you have to persevere and be creative." And this points to a movement towards focus on trial. So trial and experimentation is really kind of starting to come to the forefront of the trait that the parents want their children to excel in. So all of that stuff that I told you at the beginning about resilience, about kind of being diverse, about being culturally aware, about having a voice and being able to express yourself, this translates into all different categories and behaviours. And in food, the core thing that we're seeing that parents want is an openness. They just want the child to try, to just have a go, to try. And we're seeing this shift desired from a kind of eat your vegetables, eat your broccoli, to a more let's try it together. They are in this journey with the child. And we draw this to your attention because having spent many years working on lots of different insight and innovation projects for food brands, often where the brief starts is how do we get in the lunchbox, or how do we get in the kind of the weekly ritual? How do we kind of get into the lives of these kids and families? And actually what we are suggesting to you today is what would happen to your innovation and your ideas if your core purpose was trial. And we think that might end up getting you to the place of ritual and into these lives if you focus more on this idea of openness and trial. And we want to help you. We want to give you some ideas of how that is possible. So in preparation for this presentation today, we actually engaged our network of schools and we did a lesson plan for them. Ellie, who is with me today, is a former primary school teacher. She now works with me at the Pineapple Lounge, and created this brilliant lesson plan all around the Yuck Cafe. And the Yuck Cafe is a place that children had to imagine only serves up the things that they don't want to try. And this restaurant was failing, it was about to go out of business, and we handed it over to the kids and said, what are you going to do with these foods that you won't try, that is going to help you and other children get you to try them and eat them? In the end, we had nearly 300 responses, and we collected those responses in written format and also in their inventions. So we analysed all of these drawings, and we were able to pull together some themes to share with you of how to innovate towards trial with the kids' help. The first one that we noticed was this idea of subverted surprises. So if we take Lily's example here, she has taken her most yuck foods as curry and sprouts, and she has put them together to create what looks like an ice cream sundae. And this is a good example of this space, which is actually, when you dig into it, is all about taking the fear from surprise and the unknown, which is often why children won't try something, and transforming it into fun. So disguising something unfamiliar and taking it into a space of curiosity and excitement. And we can really imagine this idea of this kind of curry rice dish looking like an ice cream sundae. The second example from Zaid is a sandcastle. Okay, it is ice cream, but it does have carrots in it. So again, taking out the fear and moving it to a place of fun. Our second space was this idea of DIY dinners, speaking to lots of parents about how they get their kids to try things. Loads of them are using a buffet at home. So again, you know, these kids are being raised to be empowered with autonomy, and they want to be given choice. The way that they game and play, they are constantly customizing. It's kind of wired into their DNA, and they would like food to also be able to play to that idea and to be able to personalize their play and express themselves. So Ishan here, who's 14, when he talks about the ideas that he came up with for the Yuck Cafe, he says that it would get more kids trying because kids can express themselves with their feelings, and they can also come up with ideas that other kids will like. So this constant desire to express, to customize, is really exciting to children. And Jensen, who's 9, also says they can have it in any order they like, starting with whatever they choose. And a couple of examples that are already out there. This is Bent Go, which is a style of lunchbox in the style of a bento box. And this is how lots of parents are now serving up their lunchboxes to their children in this style. Taste Ed is a really interesting one. There's a lady called Bee Wilson, and she goes into schools and gives kids vocabulary of how to describe what they like and don't like so that they can get more expressive with their language about how they choose and to customize their food. Our third space is called Dream Dollops. So being a child today is really busy. It can be quite stressful. The timetable is packed. School is a lot harder than when any of us went to school. There's a lot more homework. And there's a high desire to let off steam, to escape, to feel silly, to go into dreamlike worlds. And what we observed in lots of the ideas was kids using kind of onomatopoeic, gooey, even some disgusting language to take foods from a place that's quite serious into one that's much more silly and surreal. So some examples here from their menus from Isabella, who was 7, has tangy tomato turnips, chewy chicken chips with olive onions, and chunky chocolate cake. And Tate, who's 8, has crispy onion and broccoli salad with kid ketchup, and also has some flicking fish with garlic green grasshopper, followed by pumpkin pie with pizza ice cream. So this kind of language, and we see this happening in revolting recipes. Gusto have also experimented with this at Halloween, and Ben & Jerry's, who you all know, are kind of experts in this area. So taking it into the place of the surreal. Next up, I want to talk about muses. So kids are influencer fluid. The right muses really do matter to them. If you look at the kids category, you will see a lot of generic animal characters there whose power is just not as strong as it used to be. Today's kids want to be inspired by mascots that embody wonder and pizzazz, and that was what was coming up in the ideas that they were presenting back to us. We had robot waiters, we had the idea of this gymnast kind of coming out, doing moves and with medals, serving their food in the restaurant. This character here, does anyone know it? It's a llama from Fortnite. It's like this mythical thing that just appears in Fortnite. No one really knows the meaning of why it comes up or what it does, but it can deliver kind of prizes and loot while you're in the game. And this was kind of what they were showing in their ideas, this idea of wonder, suspended reality, mystery, very, very different to a lot of the characters used to position food to children. So a real evolution here in what they want from their muses who kind of encourage them to trial foods. And our last space is called story eating. So storytelling is now to kids what we call story living. So the way that they experience entertainment franchises is across a whole range of touch points. They're very fluent in fandoms. They're very used to immersive experiences. They're used to being able to tap into whatever IPs they're interested in a variety of different ways. And they love this. They love to kind of go into their imagination into a story world. And injecting narrative into food trial can transform an experience for them. So an example here from Imogen, who was 11. She took a basic, this is a cake with a hot chocolate sauce. I'm sure you could make something healthy instead, but her restaurant was all themed around science experiments, so really tapping into the story of this sauce is going to make this cold thing warm, there's going to be a reaction when you pour it on, and we have this whole narrative around it which suddenly makes it very exciting and you want to dive into that story. And Zaina, who was 7, came up with a whole concept of a Paddington Bear cafe. You don't see many children that into marmalade, but this was her whole concept of getting children to do various different interesting things with marmalade and oranges by immersing them into the story. So there we go. I can see the timer's up. 5 different innovation opportunity spaces in order to try and inject some more innovation into the kids space. And again, just thinking about was thinking about that idea of starting from the point of trial. What would happen? What different ideas could you come up with if you put trial and encouraging openness in children at the heart of your brand and your innovation strategy? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma, very much.